Throughout the annals of history, humanity has devised some of the most brutal and unimaginable methods of torture. You might have heard a lot of different punishments from detention to jail time, but as dreadful as they were, humans have devised even more terrible and twisted ways to punish alleged wrongdoers throughout history. Join us as we uncover the top 10 most brutal tortures inflicted upon humanity. Number 10. The rat torture. Rat torture might be the worst torture method in the history of mankind. It is a horrifying and violent kind of torture that involves the victim suffering at the hands of rodents, mainly rats. It is characterized by the victim being placed in an enclosed space, usually a cage or container, with rats, and the rats being kept in harsh conditions. The rats turn the victims into torture objects because they are scared or hungry and utilize their bodies as a way of escape. The pain caused by the rat torture is severe both mentally and physically. In their desperate endeavor to get away, the mice, driven by their instincts, bite and claw at the victim, creating deep puncture wounds and intense pain. Rat torture has been applied historically, frequently to force confessions or as a form of public punishment. It was used in Europe during the Middle Ages as a means of execution and torture. During the Vietnam War, there was a well-known historical incident where rats were used to torture prisoners of war, causing severe physical and psychological damage. In the present era, rat torture is viewed with dread and disgust. It is widely seen as a flagrant breach of human rights and a horrible act of cruelty. Number 9. The Spanish donkey. The Spanish donkey is also known as the wooden horse or chevalet, is a bizarre and cruel torture device originating in medieval and early modern Europe. This painful tool gets its name from the shape it resembles, a wooden construction with a thin, triangular saddle that resembles a donkey. The Spanish donkey's victim was forced to balance with their legs on each side of the triangular saddle's pointed edge. The pressure and agony were exacerbated by the fact that their hands were frequently shackled or fastened to weights. The sharpness of the edge, combined with the body's weight, led to excruciating pain and could result in severe injuries. The Spanish donkey holds an important place in the history of torture and punishment. It was often employed as a form of public punishment and humiliation, or to force confessions. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, the device was used in several European nations as well as during the Spanish Inquisition. Because of the intensity of the suffering and the way it was used in public, it was an effective means of establishing control and terror. This horrifying device has been portrayed in paintings, sculptures, and other works of art, frequently serving as a symbol of the worst facets of human history. Number 8. The Blood Eagle. The blood eagle was a graphic and disturbing procedure. This concept was also shown in the Viking series. This ritualistic punishment was saved for those who had either committed the most horrible crimes or were enemies of the Viking society. It was regarded as the height of cruelty. In this torture method, the victim would have their back sliced open along the vertebrae while they were tied and lying face down. The executioner would next pull the victim's lungs and ribs out through the wounds, forming an outline that looked like an eagle's spread wings. The victim would die as a result of this agonizing and drawn-out procedure, typically from a combination of organ damage, shock, and blood loss. Because of its violent character and the ritualistic aspects of its execution, it was practiced during the Viking Age, which spanned from the late 8th to the early 11th century. It was a time of complex myths, battles, and raids. In modern times, the blood eagle is seen with dread and condemnation. It is seen as gravely cruel conduct and a human rights violation. Number 7. The breaking wheel. The Catherine wheel, often called the breaking wheel, was a cruel and lethal tool used in medieval Europe. Its intended retribution for its victims was death by horrible means. The invention of the device dates back to the late Middle Ages, especially in Europe, when it was employed as a tool for capital punishment and public spectacle. The breaking wheel was an intimidating device. The victim was usually fastened to a big wooden wheel or cartwheel. They were paralyzed, their limbs stretched wide and strapped to the spokes of the wheel. After that, the wheel was lifted and placed on a tall pole or frame. The executioner would then use heavy wooden or iron rods to strike the victim's limbs repeatedly, breaking bones. The intention was to cause significant bodily harm rather than instantaneous death. Every blow damaged bones and caused excruciating suffering for the victim. The shattered and bruised body was forced to suffer for hours or days as it was on display on the wheel. Death, when it finally came, was a result of blood loss, shock, or dehydration. Number 6. Chinese water torture. Chinese water torture is a very unsettling yet surprisingly easy kind of torture. This device relies on water droplets as a means of pain. The victim is typically restrained, lying flat or seated, with their head immobilized. A water-filled container is positioned above the victim's forehead, and a little droplet of water is let to fall onto the same area of the forehead regularly. Although the technique is simple, its combined results are extremely unsettling. The sufferer experiences anxiety and a sensation of helplessness because of the constant rhythmic drops of water. The effect of the single droplet increases with time as it keeps hitting the same spot. One unsettling feature of this kind of torture is the gradual degradation of the victim's mental condition. This form of torture was first described by Lorenzo Simone Qua, a Chinese-Italian psychologist, in Bohol in the 15th or 16th century. The interrogation method was used by the Japanese in World War II, by U.S. troops in the Philippines, and by the French in Algeria. Number 5. The Pear of Anguish. The pear of anguish, sometimes referred to as the Spanish pear or the choke pear, is a terrifying and cruel torture device that dates back to the medieval and early modern eras. This device was designed with a sinister ingenuity to inflict pain and humiliation on its victims. It was composed of a metal or wood pear-shaped item that had portions that could be extended by turning a key. The instrument was designed with the express purpose of causing excruciating physical and mental pain. Depending on the intended humiliation or punishment, the pear of anguish was put into different openings of the body. There were several varieties of pear devices, such as oral, anal, and vaginal pears, each designed to put a particular kind of pain. The tool caused excruciating pain as it stretched and occasionally tore the surrounding tissues when the key was turned, expanding within the selected orifice. The victim's suffering may be increased by varying the degree to which the key was turned. In addition to inflicting physical suffering, the pear of anguish was intended to degrade and shame the victim, reiterating social norms and authority. The usage of the gadget has drawn a lot of criticism, and it is a sobering reminder of the potential for inhumanity throughout human history. Number 4. The Judas Cradle. This terrifying torture device is evidence of the heinous creativity of those who tried to cause their victims agony and misery. Its use as a means of punishment and coercion to extract confessions dates back to the medieval and early modern eras. Built to be an inhuman tool of torture, the Judas Cradle lived up to its sinister reputation. In this torture method, victim would be forced into an uncomfortable and dangerous position. Usually, a pointed, pyramid-shaped wooden or metal contraption with its tip pointed toward their genitals or anus was hung above them, often with their hands and feet bound. The victim was gently lowered onto the pyramid's pointy tip. The victim was enduring unbearable pain and discomfort. As the weight of the body bore down on the sharp point, it caused deep penetration and injuries. Any movement or struggle would only make the victim's condition worse. Therefore, any attempts to relieve the pain would only make it worse. It was a preferred method of forcing confessions from people charged with skepticism and witchcraft during the Spanish Inquisition. Number 3. The rack. The origins of the rack, an instrument of terrible torture, can be traced to early modern and medieval Europe. It emerged at a time when different forms of physical torture were being created to force confessions and punish those who were thought to have committed wrongdoing. The rack was in use far into the 18th century. The oldest records of its use date from the late 15th century. The rack was a basic but brutally effective tool. It was made up of a rectangular frame with a set of ropes or chains attached to either end. and a roller. The victim's ankles and wrists were fastened to the rollers, securing them to the frame. The victim's limbs were stretched in opposite directions by the torturer as the rollers were turned, creating severe anguish. The body's mechanical strain frequently caused serious muscle damage, fractured bones, and dislocated joints. The rack was used in several important historical events. It was employed to force those accused of religious transgressions to confess to blasphemy during the Spanish Inquisition. During Queen Elizabeth I's reign in England, it was used to force confessions from people who were thought to be plotting against the monarchy. Number 2. The Iron Maiden. This horrific and well-known torture device first appeared in Europe during the Middle Ages. Although its precise historical roots are unknown, it became well known in the late 18th century as an instrument of terror and torture. The Iron Maiden looked like a towering vertical cabinet or tomb, its interior surfaces richly decorated with menacing spikes. Once inside, the subject was confined to an upright position, the maiden's door closed, and the spikes, which were made to evade important organs, pierced the victim's flesh, leaving them with severe pain and serious puncture wounds. The spikes were placed deliberately to prolong the victim's anguish rather than inflicting instant death. The victim's experience within the Iron Maiden was unbearably painful. The spikes caused excruciating pain and agony as they gradually penetrated the body. The Iron Maiden was one of the most physically and mentally agonizing forms of torture in history, made much worse by the psychological pain of knowing their approaching death. Number 1. The Brazen Bull. Ancient Greece gave rise to the terrifying torture device known as the Brazen Bull. The idea behind the design was to create a means of execution that would terrorize people who disagreed. A life-size bronze statue of a bull with an entrance on one side was known as the Brazen Bull. This door was used to place the victims inside the bull before it was sealed shut. Beneath the bull, a fire was started, gently heating the metal until it was red hot. The victim endured unbearable anguish as the temperature inside the bull's cavity increased. The way the bull's head was crafted made it possible for the victim's anguish to be heard as ominous, frightening bellowing noises that mimicked a real bull's cry. The victim's experience with the Brazen Bull could best be described as terrifying. The Brazen Bull was one of the most brutal forms of torture in history because of the severity of the agony and the psychological anguish of slowly roasting alive. And that's it for today's journey as we go through the dark annals of history, exploring the most brutal tortures inflicted upon humanity. If you found this video informative or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more intriguing content. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.